Hi, this is Chuck with Nerd3D. In this tutorial, we're going to cover shoes for poser figures. This is one of the problem points for most people in creating conforming clothing, is how to make shoes that fit the figure properly. Now, there's a lot of ways to go about making shoes for poser. One of them is to make shoes that actually fit the figure when the figure is in its zero pose. The problem is when you're making high heels, this is what the shoes would end up looking like. And it's really hard to model a stylish looking shoe when you have to iron it flat like this. So what you need to do is make shoes that fit the feet. And there's two kind of ways you can go about this. You can create shoes that fit the feet completely, or you can create shoes that fit the foot mostly. And we're going to look at the shoes that mostly fit the foot. When the foot is flat, the foot part of the shoe fits in that position, but the toes are bent up. We're going to create a rig for the shoes that partially fit, but the same technique can be used to create a rig for shoes that don't fit at all. The rig is called a dual rig. There's going to be a rig that makes it conform, and there's going to be a secondary rig controlled by dependencies that's actually going to bend the shoe to make it look like it's actually conformed to the foot. So let's take a look at how to do that. Obviously, you're going to need a shoe model that fits the figure, or actually in this case doesn't fit the figure, but fits the figure the way you want it to be posed. We're going to call this the neutral pose for the sake of this tutorial. It's not the zero pose of the figure or even the default pose. It's the pose that you've chosen to model your shoes around. Now you'll want to remember that pose or even save the pose because you will need it later on in this process. Now this one's pretty simple. I've just bent the toes up 50 degrees and I think I can remember that. So what we need is a model that fits our neutral pose, and we're going to take that into the setup room to begin the process of creating this dual rig. So once you're in the setup room, you're going to need to load the rig for whatever figure you're working with. In this case, it's the Femme rig, and we're going to use the developer rig. Obviously, you're not going to need the entire figure. And in the case with Femme, she has individual toes, and you don't need to include those in the body parts that are included in your shoes. But she has a toes body part that you do want to include. That's the actual toe that bends up and down in most poses. So check that, and you do not want to transfer morphs or auto group this. There's no morphs in the feet anyway, so there's no need in doing that. Okay, so now's where the magic trick kind of starts to happen, okay? And as you can see, the bones for the toes and the metatarsals don't line up with the shoes. So what we need to do is create a second rig. We're eventually going to make these bones that are part of the current rig, they're going to become dummy bones. They're not going to actually do anything. And we're going to have a second set of bones for the metatarsal and the toe that is the actual bone. We're going to call those proxies. Okay, so let's go ahead and start making those. And I want to select the first body part that still conforms in the chain, which in this case is going to be the foot. If you had shoes that were modeled so they completely didn't fit the foot at all, in other words, modeled so they were flat on the floor, you would start with the foot as your first extra body part. In this case, the foot part does conform, just the metatarsals and the toe don't conform. So we need two extra body parts in this for each side of the foot. So I'm going to select the first one that conforms. I'm going to pick my create a bone tool over here, and so I don't accidentally select something when I start dragging this bone out, I'm just going to drag it way down here so it's out of the way. And we need a metatarsal and we need a toe, and you'll be tempted to make this want to go parallel with the toe that's in your figure right now, but when you draw it the first time, because you want the joint orientation to match the existing figure, just draw it parallel to what's there for now. We'll fix this later on in this process. Okay, before we go any further, we got to remember to rename these guys. So I'm going to pick my first bone, and we're going to give it a sensible name over here in the Properties tab. Let's see here, right shoe meta, or something like that. And you can, name the exposed name something nice. Now you might notice that I'm not naming these on a standard convention for this figure. These bones have to have a different name from the real bones that are actually conformed, the ones that are going to become dummies later. And we need to create a second set of bones for the left side or the other side, depending on which side of the figure you normally do first, and name them as well. We're going to start lining up the new bones, the proxy bones, to sort of be in the right place for the role they're going to play in the shoe. So I'm going to grab what's going to become the metatarsal, and I'm going to start positioning it so that it lines up more or less with where the shoe is. And let me kind of change the view mode here so it's a little easier to see what's going on. Make these a little brighter. The origin of the first body part that diverges from the main rig needs to be very close to the origin of the existing body part, and that's just so the bends will happen smoothly. And this is subjective. You can't really put it in by typing the same number in there. And you're going to just kind of fiddle with it until you get it in the same place. I should actually be looking at an even different view here. And as you can see, it's not inlined, and it's all kind of going to be done by feel here. You just have to place it in the same sort of place as the body part that you already have. Now, we get down to the toe, it starts becoming very different because we really want this to be bent way up like this. And what's going to happen is when we start working on this in the pose room and finalizing the weight maps, we're going to start matching the bones so that they match the posed version of the foot. Now, this may sound a little bit scary at first, but because the natural pose of the shoe is going to be almost the zero pose for the model, our joint setup doesn't have to be that precise for this to work. There's one exception to this, and this is going to be the joint orientations. But we're not going to set the orientations in here because we can't actually see the rotations. We're going to have to do that in the pose room. So more on the joint orientations a little bit later. So once you've got the bones more or less in the right place, you don't need to do both sides. You can simply use the figure symmetry command in here to copy the setup from one side to the other. So rig symmetry custom, I went to the right side first. I don't need all of them. I just need the tarsal and the toe, and basically just the ones that you created. Okay, that's all we need to do in the setup room. Okay, and as soon as I conform these in the pose room, the toes pull off and do exactly what you'd expect them to do, the wrong thing, because these don't actually fit. So let's look at what we need to do to make them fit. For that, we're going to need the joint editor. And let's start by getting the foot set up so that it's working right, because that's going to be the easy part actually in this. So if I look at the foot, it already actually works pretty well. It's more or less conform. You see, I can move the foot and I get expected results there. You just want to make sure that this part is working the way it's supposed to before you move on to the rest of the foot. So let's go down one rung here onto the tarsal, and this is where the interesting bit starts happening. Let me get the right metatarsal there. We only want this central part of the shoe to actually bend. So we're actually going to have to edit these weight maps a little bit. And you don't want to edit the weight map on the real metatarsal, the real bone. This one is the one that's going to become a ghost. You want to actually work on the shoe part. And you need to make sure that the shoe part has the same affected actors as the original one does. And in this case, if you look in the affected actors list for this, it includes the toes. So we want to make sure we do that for the new proxy bone. It needs to include the right affected actors. So it needs to include the right foot. It needs to include the metatarsal, the one that's going to be a proxy for, and the toes. pretty much everything in the shoe. Now you can see if we look at the proxy and the dummy, the area affected by the weight maps is more or less the same. Now here's kind of a little bit of a dirty trick you can do to make this a little bit easier along the way, is we can take this existing bone, which doesn't really work right yet. I need to have the bend selected there. You can see it's not working the way you want it to. But what is actually kind of close here, the weight map is basically kind of right already. So you can save yourself some editing here by simply copying the existing weight map from that bone that's going to be a ghost, or that's going to be a dummy, and using that as a starting point for your proxy. So I'm going to go into the proxy tarsal. I'm going to make a weight map for it. And I'm going to come in here and I'm going to paste that weight map in. Now, back to the bone, and we're going to make this into an actual dummy bone now. I'm going to open its weight map, and I'm going to set all to 0. And you need to do that for all the weight maps in that particular joint. Okay, this is now a dummy bone. The metatarsal here on the right foot doesn't actually do anything. Now, if I bend it right now, it's going to seem like it still is doing something. And that's because we haven't turned off the toes behavior yet. And we're going to want to do the toe, but we'll do it in a moment. We're going to get to it. There is another way to make these into dummy bones by editing the CR2 file and deleting all of the relevant channels, but that's the subject of an entire another tutorial, and we're not going to go there yet. Now you're thinking, oh, it still doesn't work like it's supposed to, it's not fitting. Remember, it's the toes that are causing that. So before we go any further with this, let's go ahead and get the toes copied over. And you're basically going to do exactly the same thing that you did with the metatarsal on the toes. You're going to copy the weight from the original one and paste it into your proxy bones. Go down to the proxy, new zone, and paste. And paste. And I didn't get anything. Who can tell me why? Put your hands up. It's because I didn't set the affected actors for this bone yet. It has to affect the same thing as the original toe bone did, which is the real right toe, the metatarsal, and in this case, it does affect the foot. Okay. Now if I paste this in, it's going to actually work like it's supposed to. Just like we did with the metatarsal, the toe bone needs to be made into a dummy. So we'll delete all the weight maps from that one as well. Okay, so now this is beginning to look like it may actually fit this figure. The next step we need to do is connect the proxy bones, that's these guys down here, to the target figure. And we're going to do that with poser dependencies, with keyed dependencies. So I'm going to open up the toes of the target figure, and I'm going to go to the bend channel. I'm going to click that little triangle and edit dependencies. On the keyed dependencies tab, click Start Teaching. Now I'm going to select the toes, the proxy toes, not the dummy toes, the proxy toes of the shoes. And the X rotate, which is going to be the bend channel, I'm going to alt click on that channel. And you'll notice when that happened, I got a new dependency over here. Now, what I've just done when I alt clicked with this already bent to 50 degrees, I've created an offset dependency. This dependency for the toes is actually 50 degrees off from the rotation. And this is how we're going to make this whole thing work. The ghost rig is going to be already bent to match the pose in the target figure. Okay, let's go ahead and finish setting this particular one up. I'm going to use the dial on the joint editor here to rotate this all the way to its limit of -75. And then I'm going to use the dial in the parameters palette to match the rotation in the foot, which is going to actually be -25. You should type those in if you know what the difference is. You can eyeball it if you want to, but you get better accuracy that way. We're going to rotate it the other way to the opposite limit, and we're going to rotate this to the opposite direction, and this is going to be -7, or going to be 75. And you'll know you've got this right, these numbers over here right, when this red line is straight. Now it'll be at an angle, sloped one way or the other, but it should be a straight line. Okay, you're going to set up the rest of the rotations, twist and side to side, exactly the same way, setting the 0 center point and then setting each limit of rotation. Let's go back and fix some of the weight maps now. So I'm going to open the joint editor, Control-Shift-J if you're using hotkeys, and I'm going to pick the X rotate. We'll rename these dials to bend and twist and side to side later. And I'm just going to edit these kind of roughly here. This does not need to be as perfect as you might think it would have to be for this to work, because your natural pose, the pose that this was modeled for, is going to be very close to the 0 pose for these shoes. So there's not going to be very much bending when these are in their natural pose, because that's the pose they were modeled for. I'm going to go ahead and edit on this a little bit here, just kind of rough it into place. Okay, and after a little bit of editing, this is the weight map that I've got left. And let me show you how this bends. You can see that it doesn't really look like it's that good, but remember, in the natural pose, which is going to be right around here, there's very little happening with the actual bend. So that as long as it looks good in this range, it's going to work for you. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit here as well. I've already got a really good weight map for the bending of the toes. I'm just going to copy that and paste it into the side to side and twist. That's going to be good enough for this to work. So I'm going to open the bend, and I'm going to go copy, and I'm going to go to the side to side. I'm going to make a weight map and paste it in there. And I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to keep on cheating to get the twist. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to set up the joint orientation. And this is probably going to end up being the most confusing part of this whole thing, is getting the joint orientations set the right way. Now position the camera so you can get a good look at the origin indicator for the shoes and the foot. This is what we're going to be aligning. And I'm going to switch back and forth between the figure's real toes and the proxy toes. And you can see the centers are in very different places. And to get good results, we want these actual computed final centers to be more or less in the same place. So here's the low-tech trick for doing this. I'm going to position the corner of the joint editor right at the spot where that needs to be. It's kind of like pointing at the screen with your finger and going, okay, I want to put it there. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I just want to put it right there. And you're going to want to do this from a couple of different angles. So, move the camera around a little bit. Try positioning it again. So here we go. We're going to take it from the top this time. Open the joint editor back up. Put the corner where it needs to be. And I'm going to pick the toes. And that one's pretty close. Okay. Just keep doing this a few times until you get it close enough. And remember, because the natural pose is close to 0, there's no bending, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Now for the confusing part, the orientations. Because the toe is bent 50 degrees up, the orientation of the toe for the proxy needs to be twisted by 50 degrees from whatever its original number was. And rather than doing the math to figure this out, first I'm going to show you what happens and what goes wrong if it's not set right. So let me pick the toe, and I'm going to just twist the toe, and you're going to notice that the shoe and the toe of the figure are kind of going different directions. One's going sideways and one's going up. And that's because the orientation of the rotation is different between the shoe and the foot. So here's how we're going to fix this. I'm going to pick the toe. I'm going to look right straight down this green line. I'm going to look right straight down the x-axis of this figure, of the toe. And I'm also going to rotate the camera so that I'm looking, and once again, we're going to use our venerable corner of the joint editor to basically point at the screen where we need it to be. I'm going to get this fairly close here. Now I'm going to pick the proxy toe, and you can see the joint is way different orientation from the foot. Make sure you've got the center selected, and now you're going to start playing with these dials until you get it in the right spot. And the reason I've set it up so it's looking right straight down this axis is so I could line both of them up at the same time. See, I can twist and I can get that x-axis to where it is pretty close to that of the toe. Now, let's see if I actually got this right, because I think I actually went the wrong direction. I did. I actually have this 180 degrees out of phase. Instead of going up, it's going sideways. And I'm kind of glad I made that mistake, because I want you to be able to see and understand why it would do this to you, where you've set it so it lines up and it's actually going completely the wrong direction. So we're going to go back to the same camera angle and adjust the orientation so it's the right way around this time. And I'm going to rotate this the other way. Wait, that's the wrong other way. It needs to go this way so that they actually line up like they're supposed to. And once again, close is good enough. Let's make sure we actually have this working right this time. There we go. And you're going to rinse and repeat this for the metacarpal, basically, or the metatarsal, excuse me. It needs the same treatment. And if you were doing a figure that had the foot not matched either, you would, of course, need to do it for the foot as well. Basically, line up your center when it's in pose. Line up the orientation so that it matches when the figure is in the neutral pose. And that is how you make shoes that don't fit. So there won't be any more cruel shoes for you. Thanks for watching, and have fun using Poser.